All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for the System of Support for Expanded Learning presentation on contract requirements. My name is Jen Taylor, and I am an Education Programs Consultant in the After School Division here at the California Department of Education. Joining me today is my colleague Deborah Denico, a Fiscal Analyst in the After School Division, and other colleagues from the After School Division, including Anna Johnson, our Administrator. Before we get started, we would like to cover some housekeeping. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the chat in the right-hand corner. That way we can answer questions at the end of the presentation. So the purpose of today's presentation is to review what will be included as part of the System of Support for Expanded Learning contract, including the required reports, expectations, and roles and responsibilities. We will also cover what can trigger a contract amendment or a change to the contract. So the majority of attendees of today's webinar are fiscal contacts from the county offices of education that are in the process of negotiating contracts with the California Department of Education. Some of the slides are programmatic requirements, but we are sharing this information to give you a full picture of the contract and to assist with documenting the activities as part of the reporting process. We will be providing a more in-depth look at the fiscal report, the invoice template, about halfway through the presentation. So there are some exhibits included in the contracts, multiple exhibits. Exhibit A is the scope of work, which describes the tasks and deliverables. Exhibit B is the budget narrative and detail, which describes the expenditures and justifies the costs of the contract. Exhibits C, D, and E are special terms and conditions, additional provisions, and contractor certification clauses. These exhibits are part of our department provisions. So when can work begin with the contract? The contract monitor, which is the CDE programs consultant for the contract, will notify the contractor, the County Office of Education contact, that the contract has been executed upon receiving notice from the CDE contracts office. So that one was a little tongue twister, so I'll say it again. So the contract monitor, which is the CDE programs consultant for the contract, will notify the contractor, which is the County Office of Education, that the contract has been executed upon receiving notice from the CDE contracts office. So moving to some of the programmatic requirements, there are certain meeting requirements. This includes attendance at the statewide and cross-regional meetings. The System of Support for Expanded Learning statewide meetings are for the purpose of working with CDE staff, statewide contractors, and other regional teams to support expanded learning programs by sharing promising practices, areas of need, and other strategies to support grantees. These meetings will be in Sacramento, California. The second meeting are the Cross-Regional Technical Assistance Consortium meetings, or also known as CTAC. And these are for the purpose of building collaboration among regional colleagues to advance the statewide system of support. These meetings will be in one of the regions or counties within the CTAC. And on a later slide, I'll actually show the groupings of the CTAC by region. So the dates on this current slide are for the 2016-17 fiscal year. And the next slide includes the 2017-18 fiscal year, which are very similar. They're the same months, just a different fiscal year, and these are tentative meeting dates. So as referenced in the prior slides, the Cross-Regional Technical Assistance Consortium, or CTAC, is a grouping of multiple regions and counties. For example, CTAC 1 includes regions 1, 2, 3, and 4, which are Mendocino County, Butte County, Sacramento County, and Alameda County. That's known as one CTAC. Moving to reporting requirements. There are 3 quarterly reports required as part of the System of Support for Expanded Learning contracts. There's the Progress Report, Report of Grantees Report, and the Invoice Report. As you can see on the slide, there is an activity reporting period by quarter and an associated due date for each reporting period. All reports must be submitted by the deadline. And the due dates cover both fiscal years of the contract. The first report, the Progress Report, is to document technical assistance activities outlined in the contract. Each technical assistance activity, such as site visits, communities of practice, and workshops, must be included on the Progress Report. The Progress Report identifies where the technical assistance activity occurred, what type of technical assistance activity was provided, the name of the person conducting the TA, the format, who participated, the outcome deliverable, which task the activity is aligned with in the contract, and any follow-up provided. You'll notice that the top of the report includes the activity reporting period. The date of technical assistance should be within that activity reporting period. So on the left-hand side, you'll see the date. It is important to note that a payment cannot be made unless the Progress Report is attached to the invoice when we process the invoice. Our CDE accounting office will be looking for this documentation during their review. As the contractor is completing the Progress Report, it is important to consider the following questions. Are tasks, subtasks being completed as outlined in the contract? Or in other words, do the activities deliverables match the activities deliverables in the contract? Is the contractor meeting timeframes and benchmarks? The dates, timeline included in the Progress Report should match the timeline in the scope of work. And does the quality of the work meet CDE's expectations? And we'll discuss the question of quality later on in the presentation. Moving along to the Report of Grantees. The second report is called the Report of Grantees. The purpose of this report is to capture who is participating in various activities, such as communities of practice, workshops, receiving site visits. It is important to capture this information in order to document grantees attending technical assistance activities and capture the most recent contact information of grantees. Each section of the report includes the name of the technical assistant, the date of the technical assistance, and then the table includes the participants and their contact information. The third report is the Invoice Report. The purpose of this report is to monitor and track expenditures. The contractor must mail contract invoices directly to the contract monitor at the address identified in the contract. The Invoice Report must be on County Office of Education letterhead and have original signatures in blue ink. So this is just a basic view of the invoice template, and what we're going to do right now is we're going to bring up the invoice template and actually go through with Deborah the invoice template and the invoice cover page, sample cover page.
Good afternoon. So on this invoice template that we've created for you, the highlighted areas or cells are the actual information that we must see on this form, to include your invoice date or number, the billing period, which should coincide with the report slide that we reviewed a few slides ago with the various dates that those reports targeted due dates for your submission. The contract number, which will be assigned and will be provided on your copy of your contract when you receive that. The date the invoice was prepared, and attention it to the contract monitor, which is, again, your CDE consultant. There are 4 or 5 tasks associated with each contract, depending on your individual contract. Some had 4 or 5. Typically is strictly administrative, but we've added the column in the event that anyone had any costs associated with those. The cells at the bottom of the invoice tool are cells that have a formula associated with it. So the total direct cost column, the subtotal columns for each line item, the total direct cost column, the indirect cost percentage, and the total cost. Now the indirect cost percentage will need to, will vary depending on the county office's indirect rate. And so that may need to be altered based on your individual contract to the correct percentage. And the one thing that I do want to bring up is that, again, in regards to your subcontracts, only the first $25,000 of subcontracts can you charge an indirect cost for. So any subcontracts that you have above that are not eligible for an indirect rate. The other cells throughout the document are just numbered cells for you to populate with whatever your costs are associated with those. At the bottom, we do need this signed by the authorized agent that the contract is with, as well as your county office of ed fiscal contact person's email and phone number so that we may contact them with any questions we may have regarding the invoice. And do we have any questions? We haven't received any questions yet, so if you have any questions on any of these, go ahead and feel free to populate those in. We're now looking at the cover sheet, which is should accompany your invoice. And again, important information is highlighted, which is your contract number, the billing period, so again, associated with that list of dates, due dates that we had, the contract monitor assigned to your contract, and then also be sure to include your point of contact information so that, again, if we have any questions, we may contact you. And that's essentially it on that. They're both pretty simple forms.
So as far as the invoice tool, we can work with you to customize or personalize your invoice template to meet your contract. So just some other questions when you're completing the invoice tool are, do the charges on the invoice support the work that was completed during that time frame or activity period? So really looking at those costs, making sure that they fall within the activity period. And does the time period and the services provided during that time period reflect and support costs that were incurred? So are the items allowable costs for that time period? Were they services provided during that time period? And then finally, is the invoice complete? Are all fields completed? So specifically those yellow fields completed or highlighted on the tool. And also, is the invoice on agency letterhead and signed in blue ink? So in accordance with Public Contract Code, the CDE shall withhold from the invoice payment amount to the contractor an amount equal to 10% of that payment. And the retained amount shall be held by the CDE and released after all tasks are completed at the end of each fiscal year. So for each payment, 10% will be withheld until the end of each fiscal year. So moving along to invoice disputes. Once the CDE contract monitor receives and reviews the invoice, if there are any errors or discrepancies, such as invoice requirements not being met, so not on letterhead, invoice documentation is incomplete. For example, if there's a missing progress report, or costs that may be inappropriate. For example, costs submitted are not part of the contract or for another program, or even if costs exceed the allowable cost per budgeted task amount, then an invoice may be disputed. And there are a couple ways that it can be, there can be a dispute. The CDE contract monitor has to complete the invoice dispute form first, and they can dispute part of the invoice and only pay a portion of the invoice, or dispute the entire invoice. So as far as the timeline for invoice approval, there's really a 45 calendar day period. There are multiple levels of review for invoices. The contractor must submit the completed invoice to the CDE contract monitor. The monitor reviews the invoice and compares it to the scope of work, the timeline, and progress report. After the review, it is submitted to the contract analyst who confirms calculations. Then it goes to management, then the CDE accounting office. So after the CDE accounting office reviews the invoice, it is then submitted to the state controller's office for processing of payment. Contract evaluation. So the final report at the end of the contract period is the contract evaluation. The form must be completed for all consulting services contracts with a dollar value of $5,000 or more within 60 days of completion of the contract. So what does the contract evaluation form include? It includes a description of the services provided under the contract. It asks if the services are being utilized, and it asks if the contract fulfilled all requirements of the contract, including quality standards. If performance by the contractor was unsatisfactory, a copy of the evaluation must be sent to the Department of General Services and the contractor. So for a system of support for expanding learning contracts, the Standard 4 evaluation form will be completed at the end of the second fiscal year, so the end of the contract period. 2017-18, at the end of that year. So moving along, the next couple of slides are just some general expectations. These were shared a couple of weeks ago with the County Office of Education contacts as part of the Regional Lead meeting, and just some general expectations for contractors. They include that invoices must be tied to tasks within the scope of work of the contract. That we expect open communication if things are happening, to notify us ahead of time. If it's in the contract that item must be approved before being sent out, that it must be sent to the contract monitor, which is the CDE programs consultant, and that work must be completed within the timeline set in the contract. So we also have included some expectations for contract monitors for CDE programs consultants. in sharing those, that the CDE programs consultant or contract monitor will work with the contractor to assist with the scope of work and budget and developing that, assist with general navigation of the CDE system or approval process, how it's linked to the after-school plan and the system of support, regular communication, open, clear communication, help with any kind of emerging issues. So in communicating those issues ahead of time, the contract monitor can assist, maybe come up with ways to assist with those changes. Clear reporting expectations, so the invoices, progress reports, report of grantees, help send out field communication, provide guidance and collaboration on this project. So just a macro view of roles and responsibilities as part of the contract. So the contract monitor is the fiduciary, the responsibility for the state of California, so processing of payments, assisting with scope of work, monitoring, must maintain records, and evaluate the contractor. The contractor must be highly skilled, highly qualified to complete the work, communicate with the monitor any emerging issues, and we'll talk about that later on with the contract amendment process. Complete work and deliverables as stated in the scope of work, keep records, and manage time based on the timeline in the scope of work. So contract changes. We understand that life happens. Sometimes staff leave or other changes can occur, such as the change in the timeline. If this happens, there must be a contract amendment. If there is a contract amendment, the original scope of work and budget must have specific formatting changes, depending on where the change is, if it's in the scope of work or budget, by bolding and italics for new information, and strike-throughs to show deletions. It is also important to notify the CDE contract monitor as soon as possible when there is going to be a contract change. A contract cannot be amended at the very end of the contract period or after it has expired. Another important note, amendments may require the same level of approvals obtained in the original contract package, so it is very important to allow sufficient time for processing the amendment. Budget changes. Any change to the budget in the original contract requires an amendment. There is no longer any 10% budget adjustment language. Okay, so as part of our continuous quality improvement process, we expect, this being the first year of this process, that we'll have some changes. We'll have an amendment for 2017-18, reflecting lessons learned as part of not only continuous quality improvement, but changes with the Every Student Succeeds Act, and also changing levels or a number of grants for our 2017-18 grants, so our 21st Century competition that's coming up, and any kind of ACES universal application cycle. So we anticipate that there will be 2017-18 contract amendments for all of the system of support for expanded learning contracts. So at this time, we're going to pause and have you enter any questions you may have regarding the templates into the chat or Q&A box in the right-hand corner. We're going to take a moment to let the questions come in. If there are any specific questions about categorizing funds or accounting for funds, we would prefer that you email us those questions, and so we'll show you the slide with our email contact information. Some of the categorizing of funds depends on the situation, and we would like to address those questions on a case-by-case basis. So we're just going to take a moment. Please enter any questions you have into the chat. So we've received one question so far. What documentation is required of any subcontractor to verify charges that incurred? So we're not going to necessarily collect that information during the reporting as part of the progress reports and the report of grantees and the invoice tool during this process. However, we recommend that you maintain that documentation for auditing and for monitoring purposes. That can be requested at any time per the contract, and it's important to maintain that documentation. And I also wanted to add that the subcontractors are considered a third party, and it's really the contractor's responsibility to monitor the subcontractors, and that the CDE wouldn't necessarily, because it's the contractor's responsibility in doing that and monitoring and making sure the work is being completed, that if the subcontractors are not performing and completing tasks as part of the contractor's contract, that it could impact the contractor down the line as far as completing tasks and deliverables. So we received another question about the closing of the books. Looks like the books at the CUE often do not close until the third week of the following month, which means invoices will not be correct if submitted by the due date. So if you could go ahead and email us that particular question, that's more of a case-by-case situation, and we'll work with you on that.
Good afternoon. This is Deborah, and we had a question asking how soon after the end of the fiscal year is the withhold released to the CDE. Typically, that withhold providing with the fourth quarter invoice we've received all of the reports will be processed in 7 to 10 business days from that being from the last quarter invoice being submitted. So you typically, I send an email to the contractors that I support and let them know that the 10% withholding has been processed and for them to expect it. So I will be working. You'll need to contact your contract monitor to see if that's been processed, or they will advise you once it's completed. But typically it is done 7 to 10 business days from the time we've received all of the final reports and that fourth quarter invoice has been submitted.
So the next question is, so is the follow-up provided, only follow-up provided in that time period, and what if there is follow-up in the next reporting period? And that's fine to have, so if you have follow-up in one progress report and you want to follow up in the next progress report, that is okay, you can do that. We expect that will happen, that there will be a crossover with that follow-up, is providing services.
And the next question is the 10% withhold on the full amount of the invoice if it is disputed, or only 10% of what has been approved? And the 10% withhold is actually 10% of the total amount submitted to our accounting office for payment. So if you submit an invoice for $25,000 and we correct it down to $24,000, the 10% would be off of that amended total, so $24,000, not the full amount that you invoiced. It's the full amount that would be submitted for payment.
So we received another question about the time period for the state controller to get the check out. It's about approximately 3 to 4 weeks for the check to be sent. The next question is, if an evaluation is not done until the 2017-18, is the withhold held until then? We actually are withholding each fiscal year. However, the withhold in the first year will be released as soon as all reports are submitted for that first year. So you have to submit the progress reports, the report of grantees, the invoice tool for the first year, satisfactorily submit it, And then at the end of the second year, after you've submitted all the reports and the evaluation is completed, then the withhold for the second year will be released.